The following presentation is a production of Ride the Wave Media.
It's the Best Birth Podcast, where we interview experts that elevate you as you prepare your heart and mind to have the best birth.
Each episode will interview professionals so you are prepared for pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. Our experts will build your confidence and empower you to trust your intuition throughout your pregnancy.
This audio is taken from videos on YouTube. Watch the entire episodes on YouTube at Birth Made Mindful. You are listening to the Best Birth Podcast. We are here today on the show with Mandy Nielsen, an expert in infertility.
Mandy Nielsen is a mom of 3 wonderful children who all came to her in unique ways, including battles with infertility. She loves spending time with her husband and kids, girls' nights out, reading, and spending time in the mountains if she can't get to the beach. When she isn't being a mom, she works in marketing and social media management. She loves having a career that supports her creativity and passions for helping others. Mandy worked with the Utah Infertility Resource Center and Utah Fertility Center during her years of infertility to help support her community. Now she works with mental health clinics, specializing in postpartum mental health support. Thank you, Mandy. It's so good to have you here.
I'm excited to be here.
Well, what do you wish you had known before IVF and infertility? What would you go back and say?
I think the first thing I wish I would have known is how common it is. Actually, 1 in 8 individuals will struggle with infertility during their years of trying to conceive. And I wish I'd known that I wasn't kind of an anomaly, especially in Utah, in the area where people seem to pop out babies just like one after the other. You hear all the time, oh, there must be something in the water. When are you going to give your kid a sibling? All those kind of comments are really commonplace. And I wish I had known that infertility is very common and it's very isolating. I also wish I'd known to get help sooner. The standard recommendation is if you are over 35, that you should be seeing a professional, a doctor who specializes in infertility within 6 months if you haven't conceived. And if it's been a year and you're under 35, then that's when you should seek help. I wish I just sought help sooner, found resources, found support, and gotten to see someone who was a specialist in fertility instead of just going to my OBGYN, which is what most individuals do. And sometimes that's helpful, but it's like, imagine if you need your shoulder replaced. You just went to your general care practitioner and you're like, oh my gosh, I think my shoulder really hurts. They're like, yeah, that sucks. Here's some ibuprofen and a sling. And maybe we could just put some ice on it and see how it does. That's kind of a going to an OBGYN with infertility is we can do a couple of things. But this is my area of expertise. Someone who is a reproductive endocrinologist has had an additional almost 6 years of training in the field of infertility. That's hormones, that's male infertility, female infertility, unknown infertility, like all these different factors. And so I wish I'd known to see someone who was a specialist much sooner.
Do you feel like those specialists can then help you specifically find out why your infertility is taking place?
Yes. I mean, they're the ones that run all the specialized testing. They're the ones that have all of the kind of the tests set up to kind of determine why there is infertility within your partnership. And then they also have more refined methods of treating the infertility. So I kind of describe it like when you go to an OBGYN, they'll usually prescribe Clomid. And that's almost always to the woman. But it takes multiple people to create a baby. You need a healthy uterus, a healthy egg, and a healthy sperm. So those are 3 factors that you need to consider. And if you're just doing Clomid, all you're doing is increasing ovulation. You're just making more eggs. And so if those other 2 factors aren't even addressed, you could be wasting months of precious time just kind of, and a lot of emotional heartache doing something that it's just kind of like a shotgun approach. Like, well, maybe this will fix it. Sometimes it does. But a more targeted approach with a reproductive endocrinologist allows you to really hone in on what the issue is and then work with whatever that issue is to help you have a family.
So if those 3 things are needed for pregnancy, the uterus, the egg, and the sperm, what are the main causes of our infertility?
Oh gosh, there's so many different kinds of factors. You have male factor infertility, and that's an issue with the sperm, right? So that could be the sperm leaving, the sperm finding the egg, its motility. There's any genetic factors that can be a really big issue. Functional factors. Sometimes men are unable to ejaculate properly. There's retrograde ejaculation where the sperm goes back in instead of coming out the way it should. Lots of different factors there. With the egg, so there's egg health, how the egg is doing. If you have endometriosis, sometimes that can attach to your ovaries and impact the health and quality of your eggs. So that means they're less likely to form a healthy embryo. There can be the egg leaving the ovary and traveling down the fallopian tube. Sometimes the tubes are blocked through scarring or endometriosis There can be an issue with creating healthy eggs with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, where your ovaries are producing cysts, and that impacts the quality of the eggs and your ability to ovulate regularly. With the uterus, there can be adhesions, there can be septums, there can be a host of other factors. I'm not a doctor. I can just tell you what I learned in helping different couples and in my own experience. And so those are all kind of the different factors. And then you have a variety of couples, right? Some people have a healthy egg and a healthy sperm, but no uterus, or you have same gender couples where they need extra support to create their family, or you have single individuals that need more help to create their family. And so a reproductive endocrinologist has resources to do all of that, things like sperm donation, egg donation. The term commonly used is surrogacy, but that's not really an accurate description. It's a gestational carrier because the person is only hosting the baby through their uterus. They don't contribute the egg as well. So those are all kind of the different factors that a reproductive endocrinologist can look into.
In your experience, you experienced secondary infertility. That was a term that I wasn't familiar with.
So secondary fertility is when you have a relatively easy first or second or third. Secondary fertility is kind of a misleading name because it can be anytime after you've already had a pregnancy trying to have another child. So I had one pregnancy and I used Clomid to have that pregnancy. So some infertility there, but pretty low grade. And then I wasn't able to get pregnant again even after Clomid, multiple rounds of intrauterine insemination where they, place the sperm directly like closer to the egg and they stimulate your ovaries and they monitor you and do all these injections. And so I did that for about 3 years. 3 years after when I was trying to have my next child. So my oldest and my second oldest, there's a 9-year gap there. So it was a bit of an adventure, and a bit of a wait. But yeah, so secondary fertility is just when you have kind of that gap. And it can be, after you use it less frequently if you've done reproductive, assisted reproductive technologies. If you've done IVF, IUI, any of those kinds of things, if you've done that kind of techniques, you don't really usually say secondary fertility again because you're just struggling with fertility in general, right? Like it doesn't start you. But many couples find that they have one successful pregnancy or two successful pregnancies and then they're unable to conceive again. And that is secondary fertility.
It sounds like your journey of infertility, a long journey.
Yeah.
A lot of different options that you were utilizing. How did it affect you mentally and emotionally?
It was really, really hard. It's very difficult to feel like you're doing the right thing or that you want something that's a good, healthy, normal thing and something that comes easily to other people. It was really hard to watch multiple sister-in-laws get pregnant. It was difficult to see my husband struggle with it as well. And it was just hard to want something so much and have so little control or being able to achieve it. And that it's very much a roller coaster because you get your hopes up every month, right? Like, okay, we're going to try something new this month. This is going to be the month. This time it's going to work. I'm doing all the things. And then to have it be unsuccessful it's very emotional and it's very difficult. It's also very isolating because there's not a lot of people you can talk to about it. I was lucky because I had found the Utah Infertility Resource Center. I ended up with a lot of friends that had either gone through fertility or going through it, that had experienced losses. And so I had a really strong support group of women around me, kind of helped me navigate that time. And I just had to keep believing that something good would come, that eventually I'd be able to have another child, whether that was through IVF, through adoption, that there was another path. There was always going to be a path forward. It just would take me time to find what that path was.
And so if you're not lucky enough to have the support group as part of your system, are there different ways that you can find those families, you can get the support that you need?
There is a national support group called Resolve, and Resolve has chapters all over the country and internationally. And so you can find an infertility support group almost anywhere, and online there's lots of support for women out there. And I think something that I have found is being open about my journey was really helpful to me. People were quick to reach out, quick to be understanding. And then because I was open with it, I was able to support others. After I had hope, a couple years later, one of my friends was going through infertility and she called me in the middle of the night one night. It was it was like 10 p.m. She's like, oh my gosh. She goes, I know it's really late. She goes, but my husband isn't back yet. I have to do my trigger shot at 10 p.m. Will you give it to me? I was like, of course. And she's like, I knew I could call you because you've talked so much about it. And so I think that it's difficult to be open and transparent with something that's so intimate and personal and heartbreaking and hard. But when you are, it allows a community to be built around you.
Is this what sparked your passion for mental health, or did that come before or after?
It kind of all happened at the same time because there's a lot of overlap between postpartum mental health and infertility mental health. Going through infertility increases your risk of a perinatal mood disorder. And so I worked very closely with a lot of clinics that addressed mental health and that had mental health based support groups. The Utah Infertility Resource Center, that's one of the things that they do. It was founded by a therapist who had experienced infertility herself. And that was one of the big causes that we raised money for is free to sliding scale fee mental health care for people that were struggling with infertility. Because you just need a lot of support. And there's also a lot of losses associated with infertility, the loss of the way you thought your family would look, the loss of how close your children would be together, how many children you would have. A lot of times you have to cope with the loss of having a genetically related to you child. And so understanding those losses and having the appropriate space to grieve them, I think is really important and helpful. The attitude of, well, at least you have one child, or at least this, or at least that is very unhelpful, to say it charitably, to someone that is struggling with infertility. And so being able to see a qualified mental health professional that especially has experience in reproductive loss, in infertility, I think could be really worthwhile.
And they have the tools, they have the training, to help you along your journey. For those of us who are not experiencing it and want to support our friends, what do you recommend that we say or do?
I think the most important thing is to be open about it. If they've shared with you that they're struggling with infertility, or you suspect that they're struggling with infertility, I think there's two different paths. So if you suspect and they haven't shared with you, maybe you can just say something like, just so you know, if there's ever something you're struggling with, I'm always here to listen. I want to support you wherever you are. I've noticed that you've been a little extra down lately. Is there something you want to share with me? I'm a safe place to share. If they've shared with you the experience in fertility, ask them how it's going. Be like, hey, how's it going? Are you doing any treatments this month? What day is your treatment? Can I bring you dinner that night? Can I bring you a treat? It's hard to see all of your friends get new baby meals, and there you are after having your fourth or fifth procedure or surgery or loss, and just kind of feeling very isolated. And so I had a lot of friends do things like they would keep track of when I was going in for an appointment, or when I had a blood test, and they would be like, hey, if you don't want to share, that's okay. But no, I'm thinking about you. I'm sending you positive vibes. How's it going? Like, hey, I know you haven't shared publicly where you are on your journey yet, but I'm sending you some cookies today. Like, just to let you know that I'm here. I'm with you. Like, you're not alone. And be sensitive to how they respond to your own announcements. It has nothing to do with their love for you, their love for your children. It is just very painful. And so the losses you experience with fertility are as impactful as any other loss that you would experience in life. And so if they can't come to your baby shower, let them know that that's okay, that it doesn't impact your friendship. If they feel like they can't hold your new baby right now, it doesn't mean they don't love your new baby. It doesn't mean they don't love you. And that's a really hard space to be in, because you're also dealing with your own hormones and your own emotions and your own feelings. You want everyone to be happy. And it's hard to have someone else be really sad when you're really happy. But I think just seeing that and be like, hey, you know what, however you want to participate, I totally understand and respect that. So that's, I think, the biggest thing is offering support, and then have compassionate understanding when they maybe can't show up for you in your happy moments. They're just not in a place where they can. They would love to. I mean, I would love to, but it was really hard.
I have a friend who went through cancer a few years ago, and this was before she was married. And so before radiation, she had her eggs frozen,
Yeah.
and now they are working on trying to implant those eggs. And they've had a few rounds and are still working on it. So that's great advice for me personally to know how to help and talk to her. What are some other things that they do with fertility, like freezing eggs or those processes?
So that's called fertility preservations. That's when you freeze either eggs or sperm so they can be used at a later time. This is just my personal experience. So some of the fertility procedures, the first one is going to be ovulation induction. That's like Clomid or Femara, where they encourage a woman's body to create more eggs, so that you have a higher likelihood of implantation. Because you usually release one egg a month. With Clomid or Femara, you might release 3 or 4. So that just increases your odds. The next step on that is intrauterine insemination, or IUI, and that is where they take the sperm and they kind of spin them around so the highest quality ones are separated out. And then they induce ovulation. So they do the same procedure, Clomid, Femara. Sometimes they use injectable hormones to help create eggs. And at this point, this is where it's really important to differentiate between an OB/GYN and reproductive endocrinologist. Because if ovulation induction is not monitored, you can run the risk of high order multiples like quadruplets, quintuplets, things that really negatively impact the likelihood of success of a healthy baby. The goal of any infertility treatment is healthy mom, healthy baby. One healthy baby. If you have two, I mean, that's exciting, but the odds of all those things being healthy, you start to go down when you start to introduce higher order multiples. And so in a reproductive endocrinologist setting, they monitor how many eggs are growing and how fast they're growing so that they can make sure that they're not, putting sperm up next to 7 eggs, right? You don't want that to happen. That's very dangerous. And it's unlikely that will result in a healthy pregnancy. So that's the next step. So they try and increase the odds. So usually it's like 3 or 4 eggs, and then they do the insemination. So they go to office. They use a thin catheter to put the sperm closer to where the eggs will be released, and they time it. So you do it's called a trigger shot, and it induces ovulation within 24 hours. So you do it at a very specific time, and then 12 hours later, you go into the office and you have the procedure. Okay, so that's intrauterine insemination or IUI. So if you've heard of your friends doing that, that's kind of what that procedure looks like. The next level up from that, you start to get into the more advanced reproductive technology or ART. So that's why you want to use a SART certified clinic. That's Society for Assisted Reproductive Technology. It basically means that they've passed all these tests and they're monitored to make sure that they're doing things in an ethical way. There are surgeon doctors that are not SART certified, and they tend to do things that are not in line with ethical values. That's where you end up seeing people that are having 7 kids at a time or high order pregnancy. They're not usually following the guidelines for assisted reproductive technology. That's why you want a certified clinic. IVF, in vitro fertilization. So at that time, they take the sperm and the egg, and there's 2 different ways to do the fertilization. One is where you take 1 sperm and 1 egg and you put them together. The other one is where you take an egg and then a bunch of sperm and you see kind of how that one goes. It's in glass in a petri dish. That's why it's called in vitro, because it's in glass. So that's how that starts. And they could do that with as many eggs as they've harvested. So that is ovulation induction. But at that point, they do it at a much higher level. So you're doing injections. When I did it, I think I had 300 or 400 injections for 1 round. And they try and induce your body to make as many eggs as it healthily can. So you want a high quantity and a high quality. So it's that constant balance. Like you don't want 200 eggs and then your egg reserve is wiped out, right? They have like 12 or 15. So then they induce kind of that ovulation, and then they don't necessarily trigger it in the same way. They trigger it so the eggs start to form, but then you go in much earlier and the eggs actually retrieve. So they use a very thin needle and they retrieve each individual egg from the ovary. So you're unconscious mercifully for that procedure. You're conscious for the rest of them, but that one you're mercifully unconscious for. And they retrieve all of the eggs. And at that point, then they try and fertilize the eggs, and they watch them grow, and they see which eggs fertilize and how those blastocysts grow. And then usually they watch them for 5 days, and at 5 days they freeze them, depending on how they're growing. And they either freeze them for a future transfer, or sometimes it's called a fresh transfer. And that's where you go back in 5 days later and they transfer the egg into the woman's body or the gestational carrier's body.
Is there a greater chance of success if it's fresh?
There is mixed research on that. It just depends kind of on the person and their situation and the quality of their eggs and their blastocysts. Like sometimes if you have a low quality one, you might opt for a fresh transfer because they won't survive the freeze and the thaw. But then on the other hand, frozen, you could do things like, what I chose to do was a frozen cycle so I could genetically test. So I would have a higher likelihood of each round of not implanting a blastocyst that was genetically malformed in a way that wouldn't create a baby. It's not saying like, oh, I want like a girl or a boy or blue hair, brown hair. I think people are confused with genetic testing. This is like, is this likely to form a healthy pregnancy? And so that's kind of what you test for. And so that's one of the options for frozen cycle. And also it gives your body time to recover. So if you're doing a fresh cycle, you do the egg retrieval, which is a surgery, 5 days later. And at the same time of growing your eggs, you're also trying to thicken the lining of your uterus, right? So then 5 days later, you're back in there and trying to sustain a pregnancy. And so it's a lot for your body to go through. So a frozen cycle, you do the retrieval and then usually wait a cycle or 2, depending on your body and depending on your doctor's recommendation. And if you're choosing to do genetic testing, all of these things take time. then you would go back in. So then the next focus is creating a healthy uterus, creating a healthy lining that's thick, that will be optimal for implantation. And then they place the little blastocyst, they thaw it out, and they place it in the uterus. And it's really cool. When they do a transfer, it's like a little like flash of light when they put the little blastocyst in. It's a really cool experience. I've done 2 of them. So yeah.
I've heard from others that they feel like it's a very spiritual experience to witness that.
I thought it was a very spiritual experience too. I don't think that it's necessarily for people to be like, oh, it's the beginning of life here, the beginning of life there, because it starts to get real murky and tricky when you're in the waters of IVF. But it is a very spiritual experience to find kind of to get to that point in your journey because of everything that's led up for it. Because it's also it's kind of like, this is your chance. You've spent probably easily like $25,000 to $35,000 at this point. It's been years and years of work and a lot of procedures, and a lot of heartache. So it's very much kind of like this like very intense moment. It can be very spiritual. It can be very exciting. It can be very scary. It can be it's just kind of a lot of things. Also, you're taking a lot of Valium. So it's also a lot of things that you're feeling at that time too.
Can we talk about the expense a little bit?
Yeah.
So expensive for people to undergo these procedures. What have you seen for individuals who aren't able to afford this themselves?
I think there are a lot of really good resources. So when I work with the Infertility Resource Center, something we really focused on is helping people find loans. People find there's a lot of scholarship options, a lot of nonprofits that are around now that offer partial treatments. There's studies that clinics do. There's a lot of ways that you could reduce the cost. You can take on extra work if you can. But the cost is not insignificant. I mean, my daughter, all told, probably in the neighborhood of $40,000 we spent before she was born.
Mm.
And many people spend that much and don't have a healthy live baby afterwards. We were very lucky that our first transfer with her was successful. Our next transfer was unsuccessful, but with her, that first transfer was successful.
And that's before all of the birth expenses. That's just the very beginning.
That's just to get pregnant. That's not staying pregnant. That's not giving birth. That's not postpartum care, new baby expenses. That's just to get pregnant. And so it's very expensive. I've worked with Resolve and the Research to campaign for better coverage. So the state of Utah, actually, I testified with fellow infertility warriors. We went before Congress and we testified about our experience dealing with infertility and the expense. And they passed a bill that for state employees, they covered up to $5,000 of treatment, which isn't everything, but I mean, it's a big difference.
You could also ask your employer if they have a specific policy, or I don't know if it's a grant or a loan or a gift, but some employers.
A lot of health insurance programs have that. And you can ask your employer, like, hey, I'm struggling with this. Can we opt into this for our health insurance program? Or is there anything we can do? Some people do matching. I have found that if you don't ask, you don't know. And that's part of the opportunity of being open with it. Something that happened to me is when I had a second cycle, we lost the baby. We lost a little boy baby at 10 weeks. It was a little before 10 weeks. And that was our last embryo. So we would have had to start all over again. And at that point, we were definitely not in a place where we could do it again. And so I was kind of sharing on social media. I was like, this is, the end of our road. Thank you to everyone who supported us. Like, we really appreciate you. Everyone has been cheering us on and praying for us and sending us good wishes. We're closing this chapter because of cost and time and all of that. And I had a private donor reach out to me and offer to help support me in another round. I wanted to do another round of treatment. I ended up having a spontaneous pregnancy 6 months later when I was about to start. So I had a private donor. So I think when you're open about your journey and your heartache, it provides opportunities. People want to help. I think that's what I learned the most. Like, people are anxious to help. Your doctor's offices probably have some kind of program, or they know someone, or they'll have a list of grants to apply for. If you have a nonprofit support group in your area, they'll have grants to apply for, or different loans you can take out, or different things, or they'll know people. And I think as you start to open up about those experiences, then you'll find more options, more pathways open up for you, in my experience.
And what a beautiful way for those people to share.
Yeah. It's definitely something that's been impactful and meaningful to me, and that I always hope to pay forward as I'm able.
Hmm.
You spoke about losing a baby boy at week 10.
Yeah.
We talk about week 12 as kind of the week of viability and moving beyond. What can we do or say, or how would we handle the miscarriages that are around in that time?
So I think something that's difficult is most people choose to not announce pregnancies until they're further along. With IVF, you know you're pregnant and you're watching your baby grow starting very, very early. So you're starting at week 5. You're starting to like look and see, okay, are things happening? And then at week 7, things looked okay-ish. And then, or maybe it was week 8. It's all kind of a blur now. Week 8. And then the next week went in and they're like, I'm sorry, there's no heartbeat, but maybe, just maybe next week it'll be okay. And then next week there was not. And we ended up having to do a D&C at that time. I think something that's important is when someone chooses to share a loss, to offer them grace at that time. Just because you choose to keep something private doesn't mean that's the right path for everybody. And I can't imagine experiencing that loss alone. Like that was a time where I felt a lot of support from my community, where a lot of friends reached out. I had a good friend who had had a couple of miscarriages over the course of her years of childbearing. She had older kids now, and her husband actually reached out to my husband. He's like, look, I know everyone's there for your wife, but if you ever need a friend, man, like you're hurting too. Like you're a dad and it's hard and it hurts. And having friends drop off dinner or ask me like, what does your plan look like so we can support you? Offer to help with the other children if there's other kids. All those things were really meaningful and impactful to me. And I think being honest that a loss is a loss that happens at 10, 12, 13, 14 weeks, like those are real losses. You have already developed attachments and plans and love for this baby, and allowing people to grieve how they want to grieve.
The term rainbow baby, is that appropriate to use or?
I think it is. Usually people use the term rainbow baby, it's a miracle after a storm, right? Or a loss. And so I have a rainbow baby. I have a little boy, like I said. We had a loss, and then 6 months later, after I don't even know how many years of I've never had a spontaneous pregnancy before. And so we had a spontaneous pregnancy. It was a little boy. And so he was definitely a rainbow baby, and it was definitely a brilliant, bright spot of hope after a very dark time. But it was also very difficult. I was surprised how much anxiety I had during my pregnancy. I had very, very high prenatal anxiety, like being pregnant. Like every day I was just like, am I bleeding? Is everything okay? Can I feel a move? I swear I went to my doctor so many times. I was like, can we have another ultrasound? I'm just really nervous. You just have such a heightened feeling of anxiety after a loss. I think that's something to watch for, because a perinatal mood disorder can crop up during pregnancy, not just postpartum. And if you've experienced loss or infertility, then you're more likely to experience those perinatal mood disorders like postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis. And so if you're starting to feel those feelings in pregnancy, that's definitely something to address during the pregnancy and not wait until after. So I was surprised. And the contrast between how happy you are and how happy everyone is for you. Like all of my friends and family were like, oh my gosh. And we were too. I was thrilled. But it was very hard to just be fully joyful, because in the back of your mind, there's always that stupid anxiety voice, but that's good. I was still good to attached. I refused to name my baby until he was born. I couldn't. I was too afraid. I told my husband wanted me to all these names. I'm like, I can't do it. I can't. And being honest about that and having mental health support during that time was really important to me. So I think if you're experiencing the joys of a rainbow baby, it's okay to also allow yourself to have the both and, to have the anxiety and the sadness for your loss, to have all those kind of converging at once, and to get help and support, especially before you have the baby, because it doesn't just miraculously go away. So that'd be my advice with a rainbow baby.
When you think about an actual rainbow, and oftentimes the rainbow can show up while it's still raining.
Yeah.
And so balancing both emotions, recognizing that someone experiencing this is going to have the range of emotions, and to support them, everything they're going through. So important. Can I ask you a little bit about
Sure.
the pregnancy? So when you were pregnant after your IVF treatment, were you automatically referred to a maternal fetal medicine specialist, or what does that pregnancy look like? How does it differ?
No, it's terrifying, because like when you're doing IVF, the first 10 weeks of your pregnancy, it's like you're in there every single week. They're drawing your blood. They're doing ultrasounds. You're just right. You have a doctor monitor every step of the way, and they're like, okay, good luck, guys. And you just go straight to your OBGYN, unless you have a previous condition that makes you high risk.
So after your endocrinologist kind of like affirms the pregnancy
you.
and clears you.
Yeah. that's usually around like 10 or 12 weeks, they'll move you on to your regular OBGYN, and then you're totally fine. You sometimes with an IVF pregnancy, they'll do extra monitoring towards the end of pregnancy. You might have some non-stress tests in the last several weeks because there's some associations with frozen embryo transfers and incidences of cord mishaps or stillbirth or those kinds of things, but they're very, very rare. So it just depends on your OBGYN. Most IVF pregnancies, once you're past that 10 or 12 week mark, continue just like a normal pregnancy.
I've heard from some individuals, they'll say, well, I have to get induced because this was an IVF pregnancy, or, like I have to deliver early. And so I guess just each OBGYN is going to navigate those cases.
Yeah, a lot of that is just going to depend on the individual. And like I said, because the reasons behind infertility are so broad, there might be a need for different medical interventions. But many women that I have spoken with go on to have completely normal pregnancies. They choose a variety of childbirth methods, and all of them valid, all of them wonderful. It just really depends on the individual and what their doctor recommends, because there's no set, oh, you've done IVF, then you have to do this. There's no set protocol after that. Your pregnancy is just a normal pregnancy. You're just throwing up and tired, just like the rest of them.
Waddling around, just like the rest of us.
Yep.
What has been your experience being an older mom? Because I know some friends were able to have children until later in life. And so then it's kind of a different age dynamic.
It's totally different age dynamic. I mean, I had my first baby in my mid-20s, and then my last baby was an advanced maternal age because I was almost 40. I was 38 when he was born. I was 38 when he was born, almost 39. And I think the difference is I was a lot more settled in who I was as a mother. The harder part is I have a lot less energy. I mean, my oldest is 13 years older than my son. And so the difference in kind of the world and me as a person and our life is very different. So in that way, being an older mother is harder, and you're not in the same place as a lot of peers. A lot of my friends that have children, I'll go to kindergarten, with my daughter, and they're like, oh, like I'm having my third baby. And I'm like, yeah, me too. And you're kind of in a different spot than your peers. But I found it's been wonderful for me personally. As a new mom in my 20s, I felt very insecure with who I was as a mother. I'm kind of insecure with who I was as a person. And it was really difficult. But as an older mother, I have felt more secure in who I am. And having my oldest son is a bit of a challenge, to say the least. And so having a kid that is a little neurodivergent and has a lot of things going on, I've been able to let a lot of other things go. Like today, my daughter's wearing some kind of hideous long sleeve dress with flowers on it and polka dot striped pants, and her hair looks like a bird flew in it because she did it herself. And I was like, you look great, dear. Have a great time at daycare. The things that I would have been so anxious about as a brand new mom, I'm so like, that'll be fine. And with my last baby, Ethan, when he was born, I really just didn't want it to go by fast because I knew how fast it goes. Right at that point, my son was turning 13. I was like, wow, I blinked. And so I just really leaned into that fourth trimester of just laying in bed a little bit longer, holding him a little bit more, wearing him a little bit more often, not worrying so much about like getting my body back, whatever that's supposed to mean. Like your body doesn't go anywhere. So you don't need to get it back. And just like enjoying the experience for what it was and not wishing it away, not being like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to walk. Oh, I can't wait to do this. Just gonna be like, I loved where I was and where my babies were.
The nice thing about being a geriatric mom is it keeps you young longer.
Allegedly, that's what they say. My gray hair is big to differ.
You get to retire before your kids graduate.
Oh, that's true. I didn't think about that. I'll probably never retire. But it is nice being an older mom, and I've been surprised how many of my friends have had outside of Utah. It's very normal to have babies in your late 30s and early 40s, and in Utah, that's less common. And so it's been interesting to kind of find friends that are in similar phases of life, and be able to talk about the different ups and downs of that. And then I have friends across a wide spectrum of ages and experiences, which is wonderful to me.
Well, we love to share resources on the podcast.
Great.
And I am a huge book nerd. I just love reading. I love listening. And so I had a couple of quotes from some books. The first was from Female Fertility. This is by Toni Weschler. And she said, the strongest women become the strongest mothers before their children are even conceived. We want to thank you for being that strong mother and sharing all of these tender and precious moments with us. It's been so delightful. Do you have any resources that you'd like to share with our listeners today?
Yeah, definitely the Resolve is a wonderful national resource. If you're in Utah, the Utah Infertility Resource Center, and just really finding those resources within your own community.
So good. Thank you. Cheryl has our Mom Squad secret. She says, having to pee all the time in pregnancy is not just at the end of pregnancy when your baby is doing a P90X workout on your bladder. It's your hormones, so be prepared to pee night and day, even at the start of your pregnancy. Such a great reminder. I feel like you conceive and you need to go pee.
That's definitely true. Or if you're doing a hormone treatment, sometimes that can impact it as well.
Get prepared, ladies. Mandy, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode. We hope you've been elevated and inspired by this week's expert.
Subscribe today so you never miss an episode. And please share our podcast or post on your social media so that other moms and dads-to-be can also have the best birth.
Please note that the information provided is based on the expert's insights and personal experience. It is not intended as medical guidance. Please seek the advice of your medical provider as it applies to your specific condition.